What started out as a simple accusation turned into a shocking revelation when the officer learned the truth about the girl's father. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, comment where you're watching from, and share this video. The room was dim, painted with the soft golden hues of early morning sunlight filtering through sheer curtains. Posters of iconic rock bands clung to the walls, their edges curled from years of loyalty. Next to them, pinned sketches revealed raw, unpolished talent, figures in bold lines, whimsical creatures, and abstract bursts of emotion. On the cluttered desk, a set of half-used acrylic paints and a sketch pad were perched precariously atop a pile of textbooks. The faint hum of music floated from a well-worn portable speaker, its edges dented but its sound unwavering. Janelle lay sprawled on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her headphones barely clinging to her ears. The opening chords of her favorite song played softly, a comforting routine she had perfected over the years. She reached out with a practiced hand and swiped at her alarm clock, silencing the persistent beeping. For a moment, she simply lay there, torn between the pull of sleep and the promise of a new day. But today wasn't just any day. Today was the school fair, a glittering, noisy tradition meant to bring students together, though for Janelle, it often felt more like a spotlight on her differences. Janelle rolled out of bed, her bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor. As she shuffled toward her desk, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her hair, tousled and messy, framed her face in an unruly halo. She frowned, running her fingers through the strands, trying to tame them into something resembling order. The mirror reflected not just her face, but the looming expectations she carried. Daughter of the Honorable Judge Michael Blake, she muttered under her breath, her tone dripping with sarcasm. She grabbed a brush and began the daily ritual of self-restoration, detangling knots both in her hair and in her thoughts. Her father's reputation shadowed every corner of her life. In school, teachers praised her, sometimes too earnestly, while peers either resented her or kept their distance. It wasn't their fault entirely. Judge Blake wasn't just respected, he was feared. He embodied authority, and his name carried weight in their small, tight-knit community. Janelle sighed. The fair was supposed to be a day of fun, yet she knew it would also be a day of judgment. She opened her wardrobe and stared at the array of clothes. Each option seemed to whisper a different story. Casual jeans said she didn't care. A dress suggested she was trying too hard, and the school hoodie screamed she wanted to blend in. Her hand hovered indecisively until she settled on a soft sundress in pastel hues, neutral, friendly, safe. Downstairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint scent of her dad's aftershave. Judge Blake was already at the breakfast table, his glasses perched low on his nose as he scanned the morning paper. He looked up briefly, nodding at her with a tight smile. "Big day," he said, folding the paper neatly and setting it aside. "Just a school fair," Janelle replied, pouring herself a glass of orange juice. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the swirling patterns of pulp in the glass. "Remember to represent yourself well," he said. His voice was calm, but carried an edge that made Janelle's stomach twist. People notice these things. Janelle bit her tongue, holding back the retort that bubbled in her chest. Instead, she nodded and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. "I'll see you later," she said, heading for the door before he could offer more unsolicited advice. The school fair was already buzzing with life when she arrived. The parking lot had been transformed into a maze of colorful tents and stalls, each one offering a different activity or treat. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn and cotton candy. mingling with the faint tang of freshly painted wood from the makeshift game booths. Bright balloons bobbed in the wind, tied to every available surface. Janelle weaved through the crowd, her eyes scanning the familiar faces of classmates and teachers. She waved awkwardly at Mrs. Larson, the art teacher, who smiled and gestured toward a table laden with student projects. Janelle hesitated, then moved on, her stomach nodding as she caught sight of a group of popular girls clustered near the photo booth. "Nice dress," one of them called out, her voice honeyed with mock sincerity. It was Ashley, the queen bee of their grade, flanked by her usual entourage. Janelle forced a smile and kept walking, her cheeks burning. The day dragged on in a blur of noise and color. Janelle volunteered at a bake sale booth, arranging cookies and cupcakes while trying to engage in casual conversation with her classmates. Some responded politely. Others barely acknowledged her. She couldn't help but notice how the popular kids moved through the crowd effortlessly, their laughter drawing people toward them like moths to a flame. By the time she took a break, she was exhausted. She wandered toward the game stalls, clutching a lemonade she had bought with her last dollar. That's when she noticed them, two older boys lingering near the ticket counter. They were standing too close, their heads bent together in hushed conversation. Every few seconds they glanced around nervously. Janelle's pulse quickened. She told herself to keep walking, to mind her own business, but her feet slowed, her eyes drawn to the way one of them stuffed something into his pocket. Her mind raced, torn between curiosity and self-preservation. She turned away quickly, hoping they hadn't noticed her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the fair began to wind down. The booths were still bustling, but the crowd had thinned, and the air carried a hint of evening coolness. Janelle returned to the bake sale stand, helping to pack up unsold items. She glanced towards the ticket counter one last time. The boys were gone. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of unease, but she pushed it aside. Nothing had happened, and there was no point in worrying over something that wasn't her problem. Yet, as she walked toward the parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that the day had shifted in some invisible way, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The atmosphere at the school fair shifted abruptly when the shouts began. Janelle, who had been busy folding cupcake boxes at the bake sale stand, turned her head toward the commotion near the ticket booth. A group of organizers huddled there, their voices frantic, gesturing toward the small cash box that sat on the counter. "Someone stole the money," Mrs. Jacobs, one of the parent volunteers, exclaimed. Her face was pale, her hand gripping the open lid of the box as if holding it tightly might undo the theft. Around her, murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire, growing louder with each passing second. Janelle felt her stomach drop. The image of the two boys she had seen earlier, nervous, whispering, and hovering near the counter, flashed through her mind. She clenched her hands, torn between stepping forward to say something and staying silent. Before she could decide, the voice of authority cut through the chaos. "All right, everyone, clear the area." Officer Randy's booming voice silenced the rising noise. The local lawman strode toward the ticket booth, his broad shoulders and sharp uniform radiating authority. His mere presence commanded attention, and the crowd instinctively parted to make way for him. Randy's sharp gaze scanned the scene as Mrs. Jacobs explained the situation in broken sentences, pointing to the nearly empty cash box. The officer frowned, his expression hardening. His eyes darted toward the crowd, narrowing as they searched for anything or anyone out of place. Janelle tried to blend into the background, stepping slightly back, but her small movement caught Randy's attention. His head snapped toward her, his eyes locking onto hers with an unnerving precision. "You," he barked, pointing a thick finger in her direction. "Come here." The world seemed to freeze. Janelle's pulse quickened and her breath caught in her throat. She glanced around, hoping he might be pointing at someone else, but the crowd's collective gaze confirmed her worst fear. "Me?" she croaked, her voice barely audible. "Yes, you," Randy growled, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Step forward." Her legs felt like lead as she obeyed, the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her. Whispers rippled through the crowd, the words indistinct but their judgment unmistakable. Randy stood tall, his shadow falling over her like a storm cloud. "What were you doing near the ticket counter?" he demanded. I wasn't," Janelle stammered, her voice trembling. "I was just walking by." "Walking by, huh?" Randy's tone dripped with skepticism. He crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "Did you see anything unusual?" Janelle hesitated, her mind racing. She thought of the boys, their furtive glances and hurried movements. But fear gripped her, the thought of accusing someone without proof knot in her stomach. "No," she said finally, her voice small. "I didn't see anything." Randy's eyes narrowed, and a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Is that so?" he said, his voice low and threatening. Without waiting for a response, he reached for the handcuffs on his belt. "Let's see if a little time to think changes your story." "No!" Janelle gasped, instinctively taking a step back. But Randy was faster. In one swift motion, he grabbed her wrist and snapped the cold metal cuffs around it. The crowd gasped, the collective intake of breath echoing like a wave. Janelle's protests fell on deaf ears as Randy dragged her toward the main stage. The weight of the handcuffs and the murmurs of the crowd were suffocating, but nothing prepared her for what came next. Randy stopped at one of the tall metal poles supporting the stage's overhead lights. With a practiced motion, he fastened the other end of her handcuffs to the pole, securing her in full view of everyone. "Let's keep her here while we sort this out," Randy said loudly, his voice carrying over the crowd. His words weren't meant for her, they were for the audience, a statement of control, a spectacle. Tears pricked at Janelle's eyes as the reality of her situation sank in. She tugged at the cuffs, but the metal bit into her skin, unforgiving and cold. Around her, the crowd buzzed with activity. Some people snapped pictures, their phones flashing like cruel spotlights. Others whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of curiosity and disdain. "She must have done it," someone murmured. "Why else would he arrest her?" "I always thought she was too perfect to be real," another voice added, its tone laced with venom. Janelle's face burned with humiliation. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to defend herself. But the lump in her throat was too big, and the tears streaming down her face blurred her vision. She felt utterly exposed, her dignity stripped away in front of everyone she knew. Minutes stretched into an eternity before Randy finally approached her again. "We'll take you down to the station now," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, as if this were all routine. He unfastened her cuffs from the pole, but kept them locked around her wrists as he led her through the crowd. The walk felt like the longest of her life. Every face she passed seemed to stare, to judge, to condemn. By the time she reached the police car, she was trembling, her mind a whirlwind of fear, shame, and helpless rage. As the car pulled away, Janelle looked out the window, her tears blurring the faces of the crowd until they disappeared entirely. All she could think was, why me? The night after the fair was oppressively silent. Janelle sat on her bed, her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the glow of her phone screen. The video of her public humiliation had already begun spreading across social media. Every tap of her screen revealed another post, another comment. The title of the video was simple but damning. Judge's daughter caught stealing? Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the hundreds of comments beneath the video. Some defended her, questioning the officer's actions and the lack of evidence. But most were cruel, filled with assumptions, insults, and mocking emojis. She doesn't look so special now, does she? Daddy's little girl finally caught. Bet her judge daddy will cover this up. Janelle's stomach churned. It wasn't just strangers commenting. She recognized the names of classmates, some of whom she had thought were at least neutral toward her. Their cruelty cut deeper than anything a stranger could say. Her heart raced, her mind spiraling. How could her entire life change in a matter of hours? She felt trapped, the walls of her room closing in as the weight of public judgment bore down on her. At school, the reaction was swift and merciless. The moment she stepped into the hallway, the whispering began. Groups of students huddled together, their eyes darting toward her before they burst into laughter. Others pointed openly, their smirks unrestrained. Janelle lowered her gaze, clutching her books tightly as she navigated the gauntlet of stairs. Her ears burned as snippets of conversations floated past her. "Did you see the video? It's everywhere. I heard her dad's freaking out. She probably did it. She's always been weird." By the time she reached her locker, her legs felt like lead. She fumbled with the combination, her shaking hands betraying her attempts to appear unaffected. A shadow fell over her, and she turned to see Mia, a girl she had once considered a friend. "Janelle," Mia said softly. For a moment, Janelle thought she saw pity in her eyes. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." "Sorry?" Janelle echoed, her voice hollow. "Yeah, for not saying anything when it happened." Mia looked down at her shoes. "It's just, Randy's scary, and everyone was watching." Janelle stared at her, waiting for something more, a real apology perhaps, or some sign of solidarity. But Mia just shuffled awkwardly, muttering a quick goodbye before disappearing into the crowd. The rest of the day passed in a blur of humiliation. Teachers avoided eye contact, clearly unsure how to address the elephant in the room. In the cafeteria, her usual spot was occupied, forcing her to sit alone. Even those who normally ignored her seemed to relish her discomfort, their whispered conversations and pointed looks following her every move. By the time the final bell rang, Janelle was emotionally drained. She barely made it to her car before the tears came. She sat in the driver's seat, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel as sobs racked her body. At home, things weren't much better. Her father, Michael, sat at the kitchen table, his face a mask of controlled fury. He had been watching the news all afternoon, and the coverage was relentless. Every channel seemed to have a different angle on the story. The judge's daughter, the accusation, the viral video. The media had seized on the scandal, their headlines sensational and accusatory. "Janelle," he said as she walked through the door. His tone was sharp, a mix of disappointment and anger. She dropped her bag on the floor, avoiding his gaze. "I didn't do it," she said quietly. Michael stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's not the point, Janelle. Do you have any idea what this looks like? The entire town is talking about it. My colleagues, my friends, they're all calling, asking if it's true." "I didn't do anything," Janelle shouted, her voice cracking. She felt the dam of her emotions breaking. "I didn't take the money. I didn't even touch the stupid cash box. But none of that matters, does it? Because everyone already thinks I did. Michael ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. Then why didn't you say something? If you saw something suspicious, you should have spoken up. Because I was scared, Janelle shot back, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to make things worse. I didn't think. She stopped herself, her voice faltering. I didn't think it would turn into this. Her father's expression softened, the anger replaced by concern. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. We'll fix this, he said, his voice lower now. I'll talk to Randy. We'll figure out what really happened. Janelle pulled away. It's too late, she said bitterly. The whole town thinks I'm a thief. Nothing you say is going to change that. She stormed upstairs, slamming her bedroom door behind her. She collapsed onto her bed, burying her face in her pillow as fresh sobs overtook her. The weight of the day pressed down on her, suffocating and relentless. That night, as Janelle scrolled through her phone, she came across another video. This one wasn't of her arrest. It was a blurry clip taken from the edge of the fairground, showing the two boys she had noticed near the ticket counter. They were laughing, their hands full of something she couldn't quite make out. The caption read, "Fair thieves, looks like the real culprits might not be who you think." Her heart raced as she replayed the video, her mind working frantically. It wasn't clear evidence, but it was something, a tiny thread of hope in the overwhelming darkness. For the first time since the incident, Janelle felt a spark of determination. If no one else was going to clear her name, she would have to do it herself. Janelle sat at her desk, the faint glow of her laptop illuminating her face. The blurry video she had found the night before played on a loop. Her eyes darted over every frame, scrutinizing every detail. The two boys were barely distinguishable, their faces turned away from the camera. But their body language, nervous, hurried, and triumphant, told a story. Her pulse quickened. This could be the lead she needed to prove her innocence. She knew it wasn't definitive proof, but it was a start. Grabbing her phone, she hesitated, her finger hovering over the contact for her father. Part of her wanted to show him immediately, to let him take over. But another part, the part that had been humiliated and doubted, wanted to handle this herself. Downstairs, Michael Blake was seated in his home office, the usual stoicism in his features marred by worry. His desk was cluttered with files, news articles, and notes scrawled on yellow legal pads. He had spent the morning making calls, pressing for information about the investigation. But so far, every conversation had ended with the same frustrating conclusion. No leads, no suspects, and a community eager to pin the blame on his daughter. Janelle appeared in the doorway, clutching her laptop. "Dad?" she said hesitantly. Michael looked up, his expression softening at the sight of her. "What is it?" I think I found something," she said, stepping inside and placing the laptop on his desk. She hit play on the video, her heart pounding as she explained what she had noticed. Michael leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he watched. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Someone posted it online," Janelle replied. "It's not much, but—" "It's something," he interrupted, his tone decisive. "I know these boys. They're seniors at Lincoln High." "Do you think this will help?" Janelle asked, her voice tinged with both hope and doubt. "It's a start," Michael said. He reached for his phone. "I'll call in a favor and see if we can get someone to question them." Janelle nodded, relief washing over her. For the first time in days, she felt like someone was on her side. Over the next few days, Michael's investigation gained traction. He reached out to a colleague in the local police department who agreed to look into the boys from the video. Meanwhile, Janelle took to social media, scouring posts and comments for any additional clues. Her efforts paid off when she stumbled upon a post from another student at the fair. The caption read, "Caught something weird on camera last night." The accompanying photo showed the two boys again, this time standing near a parked car, one of them holding what looked like a wad of cash. Janelle's hands trembled as she sent the link to her father. Within hours, he had forwarded it to his contact, who promised to use it as part of their questioning. But progress came with its own set of challenges. As word of the investigation spread, so did the backlash. The father of one of the boys, a prominent city councilman, wasted no time leveraging his influence. Michael received a call from the man, who was livid at the implication that his son could be involved. "You're overstepping," the councilman said coldly. "Dragging my family into this mess? That's a mistake, Michael." Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "If your son's innocent, he has nothing to worry about. All we're looking for is the truth." "The truth," the councilman scoffed. "The truth is your daughter embarrassed herself, and now you're trying to shift the blame." The call ended abruptly, leaving Michael seething. He knew the councilman's threats weren't idle. The man had connections, and he wouldn't hesitate to use them to bury this investigation. The tension at home grew heavier with each passing day. Reporters camped outside their house, their questions shouted at anyone who dared step outside. Online, the harassment intensified. Janelle received cruel messages daily, each one a reminder of how far the damage had spread. One evening, Michael found her sitting on the floor of her room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her eyes were red from crying. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "No matter what we find, people are still going to hate me." Michael knelt beside her, his expression pained. "I know it feels that way now," he said gently, "but this isn't just about clearing your name. It's about standing up for what's right." "What if it doesn't matter?" Janelle asked, her voice cracking. "What if I'm stuck being the girl everyone thinks is a thief?" Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll remind them who you really are," he said firmly. "But first, we have to finish this." The breakthrough came a week later. Michael's contact had managed to track down another witness, an employee at the fair who had seen the boys acting suspiciously near the ticket counter. The witness confirmed that he had seen one of them slipping something into his backpack, but there was a catch. The witness was reluctant to come forward publicly. He was young, barely a year older than Janelle, and terrified of the repercussions of accusing the councilman's son. Michael promised to protect his identity, but he knew the case would be much stronger with the boy's testimony. Janelle decided to reach out to the witness herself. She found him on social media and sent him a message, carefully choosing her words. To her surprise, he responded quickly. They arranged to meet at a local park, away from prying eyes. The meeting was tense. The boy, Alex, was fidgety, his eyes darting nervously as he spoke. He confirmed everything Michael had suspected, but hesitated when Janelle asked if he'd testify. "I can't," he said, his voice barely audible. "If they find out it was me." "I know it's scary," Janelle said softly, "but if you don't speak up, they'll get away with it, and I'll keep paying the price." Alex looked at her, his expression conflicted. After a long pause, he nodded. "I'll do it," he said, "but only if I can stay anonymous." Janelle felt a wave of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step forward. When Janelle returned home, she found her father waiting for her. "How did it go?" he asked. "He agreed," she said, "but he wants to stay anonymous." Michael nodded. "We can work with that. This might be enough to bring the truth to light." As she sat down across from him, Janelle felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time she believed it might lead somewhere. The air in Janelle's room was heavy with tension as she sat in front of her laptop, staring at the blank document on the screen. She had spent hours thinking about what she wanted to say, but the words refused to come. Her father's investigation had made progress, but she knew it wasn't enough. The court of public opinion had already condemned her, and the only way to fight back was to tell her story herself. Her phone buzzed with another cruel message, but this time she didn't flinch. Instead, it strengthened her resolve. Taking a deep breath, she began typing, her fingers moving hesitantly at first but gaining confidence with each word. The video she recorded that night was raw and unpolished. Sitting on her bed, Janelle spoke directly to the camera, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I didn't steal anything," she began, her eyes locked on the lens. "But that hasn't stopped people from calling me a thief, from judging me based on a single moment they don't fully understand." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I've seen the comments, the messages. I know what people think of me, but what you don't see in that video is the truth. The truth is, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The truth is, I've been judged not for what I've done, but for who people think I am." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed on. "I saw something suspicious that day. 2 boys acting nervous near the ticket counter. I didn't say anything because I was scared. And now, I'm paying the price for staying silent." She took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling over her. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for fairness, for justice, and for the chance to be heard." When she finished, Janelle sat back, her heart pounding. She uploaded the video without hesitation, knowing that any delay would only give her more time to doubt herself. The response was immediate. Within hours, her video had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Unlike the viral footage of her arrest, this time the reaction was mixed. Some people dismissed her as making excuses, while others expressed support, applauding her courage for speaking out. Finally, someone standing up to Randy's tactics. "Why didn't she say this sooner? Sounds like damage control. This is bigger than her. The system is broken." Janelle tried not to get lost in the noise, but it was impossible to ignore the wave of attention. Reporters reached out for interviews, advocacy groups began sharing her video, and even some of her classmates came forward to apologize for their earlier cruelty. Meanwhile, the councilman wasn't taking the growing scrutiny lightly. He arranged a press conference, standing beside his son and denying all allegations against him. "This is nothing but a baseless smear campaign," he declared, his voice filled with righteous indignation. "My family has been dragged through the mud by unsubstantiated claims, and I won't stand for it." Janelle watched the press conference on her phone, her jaw tightening. The councilman's words were calculated, designed to sway public opinion back in his favor. But she noticed something else. His son, standing stiffly at his side, refused to meet the cameras. His unease was palpable, and it gave her a glimmer of hope. As the tension mounted, Michael prepared to take the next step, filing a formal complaint against Officer Randy. He had gathered enough evidence to prove that Randy had acted recklessly, detaining Janelle without cause and ignoring potential suspects. The move was risky, Michael knew it would draw even more attention to their family, but it was necessary. "Are you sure about this?" Janelle asked one evening as they sat in the living room reviewing the paperwork. Michael looked at her, his expression firm. "I'm sure. What Randy did wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. He abused his authority, and people need to know that." Janelle nodded, her resolve matching his. "Then let's do it." The complaint ignited a firestorm. Local news stations picked up the story and protests began forming outside the police station. Activists called for accountability, while others rallied in support of Randy, claiming he was being unfairly targeted. In the midst of the chaos, Janelle received a message from an unexpected source. Alex, the witness who had agreed to testify anonymously. He had seen her video and wanted to meet again. When they met at the same park as before, Alex was visibly nervous but determined. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "If you're brave enough to put yourself out there, then I should be too." Janelle's eyes widened. "Are you saying—" "I'll testify," Alex interrupted, his words spilling out in a rush. "I'll tell them what I saw, even if it means they know it was me." For a moment, Janelle was speechless. Then she smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that felt foreign after weeks of despair. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means." With Alex's testimony and the mounting public pressure, the case began to shift. The police reopened their investigation, and Randy was placed on administrative leave. The councilman's influence, once seemingly unshakable, began to falter as more people questioned his integrity. But the fight wasn't over. The case was heading to court, and Janelle knew the battle ahead would be even tougher. Still, for the first time in weeks, she felt like she had a fighting chance. As she prepared for what was to come, Janelle looked at her reflection in the mirror. The girl, staring back at her, was tired but resolute. She had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away. The courthouse loomed tall against the pale morning sky, its stone facade weathered but imposing. Janelle stood at the base of the steps, clutching her father's arm as a swarm of reporters shouted questions and flashed cameras in her face. She kept her head down, her heart pounding. Her video had galvanized public attention, turning her case into a local spectacle. Now, the culmination of weeks of scrutiny would play out under the unforgiving glare of the courtroom. Michael gently guided her forward, his voice low and reassuring. "Just stay calm. Remember, you've done nothing wrong." Janelle nodded, though her throat felt tight. She had spent the past week rehearsing what she might say if called to the stand, but the fear of being judged all over again weighed heavily on her. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The gallery was packed with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. On one side, Officer Randy sat rigidly in his chair, his face a mask of indifference. Beside him was the councilman, his jaw set in grim determination, his son sitting uncomfortably at his side. On the other, Janelle and Michael occupied the plaintiff's table, their lawyer flipping through a thick file of evidence. The first hour of proceedings was procedural, a recitation of charges against Randy, the councilman's attempts to block further inquiry into his son, and the legal arguments surrounding Alex's anonymous testimony. But when Alex himself walked into the courtroom, the room buzzed with quiet surprise. Janelle hadn't known Alex would choose to testify publicly until that moment. He looked nervous but resolute as he took the stand, his hands gripping the sides of the chair for support. "Please state your name for the record," the lawyer said. "Alex Carter," he replied, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Alex, can you tell us what you witnessed on the day of the school fair? Alex glanced briefly at Janelle, then turned back to the lawyer. I saw two boys near the ticket counter, he said. They were acting weird, looking around a lot, whispering to each other. One of them stuffed something into his backpack. And did you recognize these boys? Yes, Alex said, his voice firm. They go to Lincoln High. One of them is... He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then continued. The councilman's son. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The councilman's face darkened, and his son's head sank lower. The judge banged her gavel, restoring order. Randy was called to the stand next. His demeanor was calm, almost dismissive, as he recounted his version of events. I acted based on the information I had at the time, he said. Mrs. Jacobs pointed to Janelle Blake, and I did my job. But you didn't investigate further, did you? Janelle's lawyer pressed. You didn't question other witnesses or review any footage, correct? Randy's jaw tightened. I acted in the moment to prevent the situation from escalating. The lawyer didn't back down. Isn't it true that your actions escalated the situation? That your public detainment of Janelle caused her undue humiliation and led to threats against her family? Randy's silence spoke volumes. As the day wore on, more evidence was presented. The blurry video Janelle had found online, the photo of the councilman's son with a wad of cash, and statements from other witnesses who corroborated Alex's story. The councilman's son was visibly sweating now, his eyes darting between his father and the judge. Finally, the judge addressed him directly. Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice firm, do you have anything to say about these accusations? The boy hesitated, glancing at his father. The councilman gave him a sharp look, a silent command to stay quiet. But, under the weight of the evidence and the tension in the room, the boy cracked. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he blurted out. We just wanted to take a little money for fun. I didn't think anyone would notice. The confession hung in the air, a heavy silence descending on the room. The councilman's face turned a furious shade of red, and Randy's expression finally broke, a flicker of regret crossing his features. The judge adjourned the court for deliberations, and Janelle stepped outside for a moment to breathe. The crisp air felt like a balm against her frayed nerves. Michael joined her, his hand resting on her shoulder. You did it, he said softly. Janelle shook her head. Alex did it. And you. We all did, Michael said. Together. When the judge reconvened, her verdict was swift and clear. Randy was found guilty of misconduct and abuse of authority. The councilman's son and his accomplice were ordered to perform community service and repay the stolen funds. The councilman himself was placed under investigation for obstruction of justice, his political career hanging by a thread. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of the case, Janelle felt a wave of relief wash over her. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who had been wronged by those in power. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, their microphones thrust toward Janelle and Michael. For the first time, Janelle didn't feel overwhelmed by the attention. She looked directly at the cameras and said, "This wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about standing up for what's right. And I hope this reminds people that we all have a voice, even when it feels like no one's listening." The crowd applauded, and Michael smiled, pride shining in his eyes. That evening, as the house finally fell quiet, Janelle sat at her desk, staring out the window at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter than they had in weeks, their light cutting through the darkness. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt free. The auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of folding chairs were filled with students, parents, and community members, their faces illuminated by the dim stage lights. At the front of the room, a podium stood waiting, its polished surface reflecting the glow of the spotlight. Janelle sat backstage, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. "You ready?" Michael asked, crouching beside her. His voice was calm, steady, the anchor she had leaned on throughout this storm. Janelle took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." He smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then go show them who you are." When Janelle stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. The weight of the crowd's attention pressed down on her, but she forced herself to stand tall. The podium felt enormous as she approached it, but when she gripped its edges, she found a surprising sense of stability. "Good evening," she began, her voice echoing through the room. "For the past few weeks, my name has been in headlines and on everyone's lips, but not for reasons I ever imagined or wanted." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Some were familiar. Classmates who had mocked her, teachers who had offered hollow encouragement, and friends who had stayed silent when she needed them most. Others were strangers, their expressions a mix of curiosity and expectation. "I've been called a lot of things recently," Janelle continued. "A thief, a liar, a spoiled judge's daughter, and for a while I let those labels define me. I let them make me feel small, powerless, and alone." Her voice faltered for a moment, but she pressed on. "But then I realized something. The truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to argue or prove itself. The truth is steady, unchanging, and eventually it shines through." She spoke about the incident at the fair, her arrest, and the viral video that had turned her life upside down. She shared the fear and humiliation she had felt, the nights she had spent crying in her room, and the moments when she had doubted her own worth. But she also talked about the support she had found, the courage of Alex, the determination of her father, and the strangers who had stood by her side when it felt like the world was against her. "This isn't just my story," Janelle said, her voice growing stronger. "It's about all of us. It's about what happens when we let assumptions and prejudice overshadow the truth. It's about the power of standing up, speaking out, and refusing to be silenced." The audience was captivated. Some nodded in agreement, while others wiped away tears. Even those who had doubted her seemed moved by her vulnerability and strength. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Janelle stepped back from the podium, her chest heaving as relief and pride flooded through her. Michael was waiting for her backstage, his smile wide and genuine. "You were incredible," he said, pulling her into a hug. Janelle laughed, the sound light and unburdened. "I couldn't have done it without you." Over the next few weeks, life began to settle into a new normal. The councilman resigned from his position amidst growing scrutiny, and his son's community service was monitored closely by the media. Officer Randy faced disciplinary action, his reputation tarnished by his actions. For Janelle, the aftermath was bittersweet. Some classmates tried to make amends, offering apologies that felt sincere, while others avoided her altogether, unwilling to confront their own complicity. She accepted the apologies with grace, but she didn't dwell on those who stayed silent. She had learned the hard way that not everyone's approval mattered. One afternoon, as she walked through the school hallway, a younger student stopped her. "Janelle?" the girl asked hesitantly. "I just wanted to say thank you for speaking out. It's really inspiring. Janelle smiled, her heart swelling. "Thank you," she replied, "and remember, your voice matters too." The girl nodded, her cheeks flushing as she hurried away. Janelle watched her go, a sense of purpose blooming within her. This was what the fight had been for, not just to clear her name, but to remind others that they weren't powerless. On the night of the town meeting, Janelle stood before a smaller but no less attentive crowd. She spoke again, this time about justice, accountability, and the importance of community. Her words carried weight, and for the first time she felt like people were truly listening. Afterward, Michael approached her, his eyes glistening with pride. "You've come a long way," he said. Janelle looked at him, her own eyes shining. "We both have." They walked home together under a canopy of stars, the air crisp and filled with possibility. For the first time in weeks, Janelle felt free, not just from the burden of false accusations, but from the fear that had once held her back. She had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let it go. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with more compelling content. Explore our channel for other videos you might love, and feel free to share this one with your friends to keep the conversation going. See you in the next video.